OAIB, a conversation where we discuss HR topics that leaders are facing today. We use our 40 plus years of HR, consulting, and executive coaching to go deep on these challenges that are top of mind but often avoided. Thanks for joining us today. OAIB is approved by SHRM to offer professional development credits or PDCs for the SHRM certification program for the SHRM CP and the SHRM SCP. Attendees must view the presentation in its entirety to receive the SHRM activity code. You can claim this program for other kinds of HR certifications as well, but you'll need to provide the details to that certifying body. We only have pre-approval for codes for SHRM certification. Hi, everyone. I'm Latanya Roberts, COO, Executive Coach, and Human Capital Strategist. I'm an integrator who takes a holistic approach to turn your vision for the organization or yourself into solutions that create inclusive cultures where all not only feel, but know they belong and can thrive. My superpower is my ability to help my clients clearly articulate their needs and goals and then break them down into actionable steps that don't overwhelm them. Tawana?
Good afternoon. My name is Tawana Bagwad. I am the CEO and Principal Consultant for OAIB. I am a visionary who believes in the power and promise of equity, and I help organizations become places where everyone has a deep sense of belonging. I cut through the background noise and coach individuals and groups, but especially leaders, to make a mindset shift, starting with them being their authentic selves, aligning with their purpose, and being rooted in their own personal power. I would say my superpower is helping people become aware of their blind spots so that they can put the oxygen mask on themselves and then make others feel safe, heard, and inspired. I know I say this at every live that we do, but today I am truly excited about this topic. So, Latanya, how about you share with us what we're going to cover today?
Well, Tawana, a lot of our clients have been bringing up the issue of succession planning. And one of their biggest challenges is to make sure that they have a diverse pipeline to bring up the ranks in their organization. So, we're going to talk about that today. My first question for you is, for all those that don't really know what succession planning is, what is it? What is succession planning?
Something that is needed in more organizations. Oh, I'm sorry. That was off script.
But agreed.
Succession planning is a process through which an employer can identify and develop internal staff
Mhm.
with potential to fill key leadership and other critical roles. And I want to highlight here first the identifying, then, secondly, is developing. And we're talking about internal staff, not the staff that you're looking externally to bring in. But what are you doing for your current staff in the organization? And then acknowledging the potential that they have to fill key leadership roles. And those roles are key because we recognize that these are roles that will move the organization to the next level. And I would tell you that unfortunately, most organizations are not doing this pre work to invest in their current internal staff.
Absolutely. So before I ask you my next question, you hit the nail on the head. Succession planning is something that uh, is everyone needs it, but a lot of organizations are not doing it. So
Correct.
let's build on that, right? So when you think of succession planning, what else comes to mind?
So when I think about succession planning, it hits on a lot of different areas for me, but it is clearly about mapping out a clear plan that identify top performers that leadership has agreed to develop. And you
Mhm.
notice I highlighted or stressed agreed to develop because they see their potential to be the next set of leaders at a higher level. I also think about how powerful this process is if done properly. It has the ability to retain great talent and good people, but it also builds on commitment and loyalty. Now, the flip side to that, if it's not done correctly, it perpetuates prejudice and discrimination at the core because it creates and facilitates disparities and inequities in the organization because you tend to pick the same people that look like you, and most time that's the dominant culture. One, or two, the overlooking of those that may be equally qualified and don't have an opportunity or access to leaders to even see their potential or talent. So it is so important for us to think about the why and get anchored in how we can use this process to start to dismantle structural racism that in turn equals disparities and equities in the organization.
I love that. And so at OAIB, we believe in leveraging the power and promise of equity.
Absolutely.
Right. And then part of that is has a lot to do with succession planning. How are you creating those opportunities for others to move up in the organization? Now we know that. That's why we do the work that we do. But for those that haven't truly bought into the process, why is it so important for organizations to take a proactive approach to succession planning?
So, if organizations don't take a proactive approach to succession planning, they often find themselves scrambling to come up with a plan of action while searching for a replacement, right? And so, when you think about that, everyone knows that people naturally attrit out of the organization, right?
Mhm.
That's a natural thing that happens. What is critical, though, is to understand that there are and should be a bench that you have already identified that is ready to take position should someone leave the organization. And the alternative to scrambling
Mhm.
is succession planning. Or you run the risk of perpetuating the great resignation, which we already know that we are not ready for and are currently living in.
Absolutely. So we have the great resignation. We also have an unprecedented number of CEOs that are leaving their posts actively in the last year,
Mhm,
right? And then baby boomers,
mhm.
10,000 baby boomers a day are actually retiring, right? We're coming out at the end of this so-called pandemic, and people are making shifts in how they live, right? They're reevaluating what they want to do. So that's a huge challenge that we have to tackle. Explain the process of succession planning because it is a formal process, but what are the steps that are involved?
So, succession planning can be as simple or complex, right? As an organization is ready to take on. But there are some critical steps in the process that should be at the foundation. And one of those are identifying high performers and high potential employees, right? Looking at those that are coming up in the ranks that you see have some critical skills that have been identified and aligned to as part of your performance evaluation. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. Then it's about selecting the right people at the right time for the right position. That requires us to do some developing of the talent that also increases commitment for them to stay longer because they see that the organization is making an investment in them to go to the next level, to expand their capability, to upskill them. And then what's also important that I would tell you is critically missing is ensuring that people of color are included in the demographics of that pipeline.
Absolutely. And a lot of times when we think of the key players in succession planning, it can be limiting. But we know there's a lot more people that are involved in that. So who has a role in succession planning in an organization?
So I love this question, being that we are a HR consulting firm, right? So HR is typically the key driver in succession planning. Although support from top leadership and other stakeholders is critical to the success. I would tell you that succession planning is also sometimes referred to as replacement planning. So you may hear me use succession or replacement planning interchangeably. But I would also say all managers or others and the staff are part of this process and play a critical role because they help build accountability by being knowledgeable of the process, right? So managers are held accountable or should know the process, one. Managers, or I should say HR, should be responsible for facilitating the process, for training on the process, for making sure that everyone involved, from management, C suite, down to our staff, understand the process because it also allows everyone to take an active part in it and knowing what opportunities are accessible to them because this is where we're looking for not only for people to be selected but that individuals are working against some criteria that will be able to put them in the game, right? And I say it that way because sometimes it does turn out to be a game. But I need to understand what is the expectation? How do my name get on the list? And to be clear, there is a list.
There's absolutely a list. And you hit one of the things that was a huge pain point of mine working in other organizations. We never knew what it took to get to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't underestimate how important it is for not only the leaders, those that are actually making the decisions around succession planning, but those that want to be considered in the process, right?
Absolutely.
It has to go beyond just someone putting you on this list, this hypothetical list, but also what about just going to the person and asking, do you want to be considered?
Mm-hmm.
That's a key step that a lot of people are missing. So leaders knowing your role, players knowing how you fit into this game of succession planning, and then having active communication to make sure that this process is being followed.
But because it's a two-way street, I also think it's critical for leaders to be open to people coming to share with them. I am interested in this role, this next opportunity. I would like to upskill here. I've watched this person or that person in these different roles, and I believe that I have potential to be the next leader, or can I be developed so
Mhm.
that I can take on additional roles? I would tell you for years that was taboo,
Mhm.
by the way, right? And particularly in earlier stages in my own career, where it wasn't okay to be asked, could you be put on a list? It
Mhm.
had to be brought to you. But the Gen Zs and the millennials are not standing for that. They are pushing every single button
Mhm.
known to position themselves, and kudos to them. So,
Mhm.
as leaders, facilitators, we must be prepared to address those requests.
Absolutely. I love that. The younger generations are definitely setting the tone and changing the landscape of what are some of those cultural norms. And we have to be really open to pivoting, just like we would do with any other
Absolutely.
business imperative. You have to be able to pivot. So we know that succession planning is something that everyone needs. Not many people are doing it. So they're failing to plan. Or even if they do have a succession plan, often their policies and their processes are outdated. So, what happens in these situations when companies either fail to plan for succession planning or lean on outdated policies or practices?
Yeah, this is such a great question because people, companies are suffering from it right now, right? Unplanned vacancies of key employees can have many negative consequences. At the very least, it can result in the loss of important skills and institutional knowledge. This one is so critical. We're seeing this quite a bit again with the great resignation, which I like to call the great stand up. They are skilled people that have been invested in, and most times they're people of color, right? And invested in could show up in lots of different ways. intentional or unintentional. But you have skilled employees that have institutional knowledge that has not been passed on or passed down. No one else has been trained on it, and they are leaving the organization because they do not know what their future look like outside of keep doing the same thing you're doing with less pay increase and potentially no opportunity to be mobile. It can affect a team's ability to function and in some cases the bottom line of the business. So when we think of not having plans in place to see people grow, develop and move up, then that can sometimes impact a team's ability to grow a person to the next position because one person has been in their role for 20 years, right? Or 15 years. So it's not creating upward mobility. And then those persons that may have been in their role for some time, again, they could become disgruntled, right? Or unhappy that there's no opportunity for growth or development. It can lead to expenses to hire and train new employees needed to fill the gap. So we know that there are stats out there around the amount of investment on costs in general to onboard someone to an organization. And that depends on the size of the organization, the amount of revenue, their staffing, infrastructure that we have. So that number varies. But what I will tell you to just naturally onboard someone looks very, when it's planned, looks very different when you're having to fill a role because there was an abrupt um, departure out of the organization. And so you're taking now into account all of the uh, institutional knowledge that has left. You're dealing with the culture impact of that around team, as well as what do you do as a stopgap, which is most times giving others the work of the person who left, which also creates stress and tension in the system. It lends itself to inequities and perpetuates disparities, which all is rooted in alienation, being overlooked, explained away, and in particularly for women and people of color who are not being chosen to be developed, trained, or promoted to the next level for their own greatness to come to life.
I love that. So you mentioned a few things in your last answer. You talked about people being in roles for 20 plus years. You
Mm,
talked about inequities for women and people of color specifically.
yeah.
So to that end, many organizations are actively measuring their diversity targets for succession planning. So why is it so important for organizations to have a diverse pipeline when it comes to their succession planning?
Yeah, so this one is critical, right? Because, there's a saying, you get what you measure. And as we think about diversity measures and targets, it's an ongoing conversation, again, that's being had at many levels in the organization. But this is the only way we will truly sustain the organization. We have to prepare for the future and have business continuity at the same time. There are so many elements, but the biggest benefit to a diverse workforce, as we know, is founded in innovation, productivity, and those lived experiences that reflects the consumers in which most organizations are serving. So this is so important for business leaders to understand that if you do not have diversity targets that is ingrained in every single work system that we have, in particularly succession plans, we run the risk of having our clients, consumers, customers, employees, or even partners question why our organization is not reflecting who we're doing business with or for. I would also tell you that without diversity targets or metrics in the succession planning process, then you really don't have a pipeline. Not really, right? We are doing the same thing the same way and hoping for a different result. I think they call that insanity. And that's what we've been seeing. So I am asking the leaders, organizations to be intentional about influencing the future of your workforce, what it looks like, what it feels like, and how it's heard. Because people want to be able to look up and see people that look like them. And I believe that until we put a stopgap, right, to begin to build our pipeline, we will continue to have less diversity at the top.
I love that. Speaking of targets, one of the most common targets out there is around gender parity.
Right.
But we know that focusing on gender is not enough. Why is that?
Absolutely. So I would say there's two issues that play out here, right? So when we think about gender, we think about pay equity is one. And then, of course, we think about representation. But to just solve for women and not solve for people of color is not enough. We have to solve for both. There are so many intersections that can be taken into account, and you will still not solve for people of color if you only solve for gender. So I ask again that we must be explicit and intentional about setting targets beyond women. Also, know that diversity doesn't always translate to representation. So that is why when we're putting our targets together, that they should be more complete. So starting with assessing what's the skills we need. What does the our current pipeline look like or don't? Where are our top performers? And that ties us into so many other pieces of the people system, right? Because the succession planning process touches a lot of our people systems that we'll highlight a bit.
Absolutely. So you're right. It touches on so many other things, but I like the breakdown of just not women or women of color, right? It's
Right.
talking about intersectionality, a
Yeah.
term coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, and she really breaks down why you cannot just focus on gender or ethnicity. It's both and.
Yeah.
And as you start to segment those things, you can really start to see some of those inequities. So, as a woman, I experience certain inequities in the workplace, but as a woman of color, it goes so much deeper. So, I
Mhm.
encourage
Mhm.
everyone to really explore some of her work out there around intersectionality. And another thing that has been popping up is power and privilege
Yes.
and exploring those different intersectionalities. It's a great topic that you can really go deep on, but just look into that, and it's something that should be taken into consideration as you're exploring how do you enhance your succession planning program for your organization and really take you into the future so that you can better serve your current employees as well as your future employees.
Absolutely. And that is one thing that we need to continue to highlight, right? It is about your internal staff because I do know that there are organizations that have strategies that target, I'll meet my number, whatever that is, or my target by hiring in.
Hmm.
You also are sending a message to those your internal employees, right? Your current employees that have been there for some time.
Hmm.
And then we get into the value equation. And that's a whole nother conversation. But I will tell you, as you said, it's more than just solving for gender.
Right. Absolutely. You mentioned the message that comes out when we're looking at our organization. So what's the message that is sent when the pipeline is not diverse or there's a lack of diversity within senior positions? Because we see this a lot. And
Mhm.
leaders don't typically understand how powerful the message is. So let's educate them on that.
I love this question because as I am reflecting on conversations that I've been having, I can't stress enough that it sends a very strong message that diversity is not important. right? That people of color don't matter, to do something different for women. It sends all types of messaging,
Mhm.
and it promotes dominant culture rules. So leadership is not serious about having POCs and women in position of power. That's another message that we've heard, that we get when we see a lack of diversity in senior positions. It's also disenchanting for those future leaders that look up and don't see anyone that looks like them, which I said earlier. It says that it's not possible,
Mhm.
right? That it's not important. It also, most importantly, it has your employees to question if this is the place for them to grow, develop, and have a long term future. So, as you think about the messaging behind leadership don't care, leadership don't value diversity, I don't see when I look up people in power that looks like me, all of those things have such a heavy load to carry in your culture,
Mhm.
right? It's the morale is low when
Mm.
people are feeling this way. They question leadership, authority, and decision making. It starts to eat at the fiber of your culture when people begin to question, do you have their best intent at heart?
Mhm.
And if that is not something that leaders want in our current environment, it is so super important for leaders to align on what does diversity look like in their organization, and then start now to put things in place. And you and I both know that succession is not necessarily that something happens tomorrow,
Right.
right? Unless there is an regrettable loss that occurs, then the organization needs to move fast. But succession planning is just that, it's pre planning for turnover in your organization and doing what is necessary to groom, develop, grow, invest, pick whatever word,
Mhm.
resonate with you, to ensure that we have business continuity that will be able to take the organization to the next level. And if you're not doing that now, and you know that someone is retiring or planning to leave, or that there's an opportunity for that to happen sooner than later, you should already have a bench that you have invested in that may need a bit more support, but
Mhm.
you believe that it's able to take the realm and move it to the next level.
Absolutely, and I love that you mentioned that it's not something that it you're not planning for tomorrow, right? It's not something that's an overnight thing. It's an investment. It's a multi-year
Absolutely.
investment because as you're building out that pipeline, you're planning for a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. I mean, especially when you look at some of those key positions within the organization where if that person left, if that role was to become vacant, it can be truly detrimental for your organization to the tune of billions of dollars for some,
Absolutely.
right? So we know that it's not just HR's role to succession plan, it's everybody's role. But HR leaders, we are the allies, we are the champions, we are the facilitators of change. So,
Mhm.
how would we go about involving our business partners and our colleagues in succession planning?
So this question gets me excited. One, because without HR facilitating this process, the likelihood that if someone did put a succession plan in place, that it would be upheld is pretty much a waste of time. So I'm going to say this: train, train, train. Hold people accountable to the process, right? And ensure that it's fair and equitable for all. That is HR's number one role. Then we have to coach how the process should work. Then we celebrate our wins, we track metrics, right? And we do that often. We need to tie succession planning to other metrics such as recruiting, retention, talent management, performance management, L&D, or learning and development. And why I say that is because this is a bigger picture that we're solving for, and this is only one cog in the wheel, right? So, as HR should be the professional, should be the leader behind helping their colleagues and business partners understand how this all fit together. Because if it's just a standalone process, then it does not have infrastructure, right? Because it's fitting into a bigger picture. So, HR professionals, I am appealing to you from one to another is that we must first define this process, gain alignment from our business partners, train them up, as well as the rest of those that are managers of others. Make sure everyone has an understanding of the process, then hold their hand through it, not facilitate, hold their hand through the process and constantly check for biases, right? Because they will come up, whether they're blind spots or not. They will show up in the process, and HR should be the gatekeeper of ensuring that this process is fair and equitable for all.
Absolutely. And we've touched on so many parts of this wheel that is succession planning, right? It's the buy-in from the leaders, it's communication, it's training, it's accountability, it's
Absolutely.
practices. But what about the policies?
Mm,
Right? The policies are outdated. They are not built in a way that allows everyone to have access and opportunity to move up in an organization.
yeah.
We know that's true for most organizations. So, to want to talk about some of the examples of policies that can be
Mm,
put into place to ensure an equitable succession plan.
yeah. Hmm. So first we need to look at the rating process, right? So you're rating someone to determine if they have high potential, if they're a top performer. Most people use the force bell curve. Some people use the 9 boxes. There are many iterations of all of those in between. And some have decided we're going to give feedback on forward thinking versus what's behind. So there's lots of approaches here. But at the end of the day, all of them have some type of target or way in which they are categorizing people. So we have to first look at that process. And I would say there is policy around how we rate people on pick a scale, right? And from there, we then determine what box they fit into. And out of this box, we say these are our top performers and high potential people. And that's where I would tell you that that process is so broken because it lends itself to leaders who have a bigger voice than others. It lends itself to other types of biases, like similar than me. Uh, Coaching and mentoring is another process that I believe is non existent or broken because there is select people who get coaches or mentors or sponsorships. I think the other thing that is critical is that we have to ensure every department in the organization per level, per function is meeting whatever targets is set. Then we put the equity lens on those numbers and specifically give targets for what the demographics should look like. And most people would say, Tawana, we don't know what our demographics should look like because we're predominantly white. Well, you have to start somewhere, right? And you have to begin to look at your lots of elements, let me say, of your organization to determine how you gradually move your demographics to something that is reflective, one, of the consumers that you serve, but the world in general. Then you got to train. You're going to continue to hear me say that training is so important, and particularly around expectations. I would tell you that policies will fall into also the talent management and performance management area, even in hiring. There are so many areas in hiring where policies need to be looked at differently. One comes to mind for where do you recruit? You would say, I can't find uh, people of color in economics, as to say that people of color have not majored in economics or gained expertise. But if you're going to maybe predominantly white schools, you may not find necessarily people of color at those schools. Is there a policy to say today you don't recruit at any historically Black universities or colleges, for example? So that's another point. I would also say eliminating biases in this process and rewriting policies also depend on where and how you approach your candidates, performance evaluations, and how much of DEI have you put into your metrics. You should also consider defining what is top performers, what it does high potential really mean, because I will tell you today that that is also gray. It depends on a leader, it depends on the function, it depends on the um, department that you're in. It depends on seniority. It has so many elements, but in all of those, there is institutional racism built in. So it lends itself to exclude women and people of color.
Absolutely. So you said a lot, but I am going to ask you to go a little bit deeper, right?
Okay.
Because equity is our mission. So when we're thinking about equity, of course, that's access and opportunity.
Yes.
So what can organizations do to ensure that succession planning creates opportunities for people?
Well, you said it. That is my biggest thing. It's not just about the opportunity, but it's access to set yourself up to be ready for the opportunity. And that's where the investment comes in. But too many times people are not made aware of that opportunities exist because they are not being considered. I'm not going to share that there's a VP or director role coming up with you, Latanya, because you're not even being considered for someone that may fall on the short list of candidates. Therefore, you are denied access to the roles, to the promotions, to special assignments, to different teams, even locations, right? Or other opportunities because of diversity, or should I say, lack thereof, because you don't fit in with the dominant culture. Therefore, defining the criteria for the talent, i.e., the skills, the competencies, the experience, the performance needed to address the organization current and future needs is imperative. And that's how we begin to level the playing field. And at the end of the day, business continuity or institutional knowledge is critical. So if we don't begin to pass that information on to our next set of leaders, then of course people of color or women would not be in the running because they have not been invested in on the front end as part of preparing for those potential opportunities.
Yeah. Um, so much in that. And we've clearly drove home why you need a succession plan, why you need to take a proactive approach. We've touched on how to do it, talked about metrics in here. Now, there's going to be some watch outs. There's going to be some pitfalls that may occur that leaders need to be aware of when they are enhancing their succession planning and carrying that out. What are some of those things to keep in mind?
Yeah, this one is unfortunate for me as I think about responding to this because there tend to be, the majority of the responsibility is put on HR, which I understand that they're the facilitators and gatekeepers, right? But it's as if leaders don't play a role at all in this. And when they do play a role, we tend to see lots of biases show up when they play a role. Some of them we can say blind spots, right? And the one we see most is leniency, similar to me, biases, where leaders are looking for people that look like them, people that have same experiences as they had, people. And when I say experiences, I'm also talking in and out of work, right? I'm talking about have attended the same schools that they've gone to, where they put their value and how they are evaluating others against that. I've also seen a pitfall is not having aligned to metrics. What are we evaluating our talent on? I mean, really evaluating them on. When we have moving targets, that in and of itself creates inequities and disparities, mostly for people of color and women. I would tell you also, one of the things that I am pushing hard on is that before we might did a mid-year succession planning review, but for sure people did it at the end. We need to do more frequent checks with the succession planning because it's so important for us to not miss dynamics or changing often. I would also say another pitfall is not respecting or following the process, making it up as they go along because it fits the current reality. So I don't see it taken as seriously as it should. Or also I see them circumventing, the process so that they can get the desired results that they want. Most times, though, I would tell you that they're untrained. They don't understand or think that the process is helpful. And so there's a lot of resistance. So I think it's so important that there's a mindset shift. And I do believe that that's on HR to help provide them with the information, the training, the know how to facilitate them through the experience so that they can develop some confidence in doing the process. But these pitfalls is what I believe is at the core of why we haven't made as much leeway. And so it's deemed cumbersome, too much to do, don't have enough time. And it's now become something that is just another thing to do in the midst of our busy schedule.
Right. So it's talking about timing and really needing to have these conversations more frequently. Another bias that's popping up as we transition or start to embrace this hybrid work environment is the proximity bias.
Yeah.
Okay? Naturally, because you have exposure and you're celebrating certain experience with people more often that are close to you,
Yeah.
you're going to like them more. So then the leniency
Mhm.
bias, like I like this
Mhm.
person. There's
Yeah.
all those things
I
pop up.
know their situation. They have 2
Right.
children and a wife that's sick and right?
All of that
Mhm.
pops up. So then what about the team members that have decided to move? You don't see
Mhm.
them as often.
Right.
I think this is one of those things that really emphasizes the need to have more regular check-ins,
Mhm.
right? Make sure that you're actively reaching out and talking to your team members. And team members, advocate for yourself because by no means is this just on the leader who
Right.
has to manage and make decisions about multiple people. I always say be a part of your own rescue, right?
Mhm.
So speak up for yourself. Say when you have an interest for something, say when you have a need for something. Raise your hand for certain opportunities and make sure that you are seen and heard, right? So that proximity bias is going to be a big one that I believe companies are going to have to navigate as they start to shift the culture around succession planning.
Before we leave that, because you bring up such a great point about advocating for yourself. In succession planning, there's a lot of steps, right, that are taking place. You got calibration meetings where people are talking about your work, what you have delivered, the impact that you've made. What is the story?
Mhm.
It is up to you to also give a narrative about your work, what you've done. how you have contributed to the business, how you've contributed to the organization, your contribution. Who else needs to know about your deliverables? Does it just stop with your manager? I will tell you, absolutely not.
Mhm.
Absolutely not. You should always be prepared to share the impact you've made, what you have delivered. And over time, people will start to repeat that. That is just so important for you to advocate for yourself, as Latanya said, in sharing what you've done, and then getting your colleagues. Colleagues are also great advocates of each other,
Mhm.
right? I worked on this project with Latanya, and she was amazing. She moved the audience to open up and to understand. That is also welcome and should become part of our norm and our conversation as we celebrate and elevate each other. So
Absolutely.
please, 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 that is a critical point that everyone should take away.
Thank you for that, right. Be the hero in your story.
Yeah,
When people go into these meetings, they have 1 to 3 minutes to share the details on a year's worth of work for you. How do you help them show up as you being the hero in that story?
absolutely.
All right. So next thing is the communications. We touched on it briefly earlier, but we didn't go there with communication.
Hmm.
And when working with their clients, that's the one thing that people tend to struggle with, right? There's
Hmm.
a lot of work going on behind the scenes, but the people don't know
At
what's
all.
happening, right? So it's a double edged sword. So communications, communications, communications. How can organizations communicate to their staff what the new succession planning process is?
This is so critical because you have to bring your organization along in this journey. Because if you don't, there will be a huge disconnect about what I believe as someone that's trying to get on the list, for example, should be happening. The managers have another understanding. The C suite leaders believe that they have agreed to another, or have another understanding. And then those that are delivering, or the gatekeepers, HR, partnering with the different managers, may have another understanding. So I go back to it, and I said it before: train, train, and train to ensure everyone knows what to expect. You got to know what to expect, know the process. You got to share the metrics. You also need to talk about the strengths and opportunities in the organization, because I will tell you, coming out the gate, you don't always get it right. There's some things that you believe were in place that may be weaker or not in place to help uphold this process. So those things become so important. This one for me is critical. Everyone has a role and responsibility in this process, but you have to define what that is, right? This, excuse me, also about sharing the progress on the process, because it truly is a process. We might only start out with having 3% of our people in the succession planning process, because we wanted to start with upper management first. And we may want to do a phase approach to now bring in other levels in the organization. And that could be over some time. And most importantly, we have to build in accountability at every level in every department. These things become so critical. So then how do we get that out? As you know, we have to use several mediums in order to make sure that people understand what's being communicated. So for those of us that do this on regular, staff meetings, town halls, newsletters, having scripts for your leaders to be able to communicate to their team and staff on what to expect, having one-to-one conversations. Managers need to be prepared that people are going to say, oh, we do succession. Am I on the list? What does it take for me to be on the list? What are you using as measures and metrics for someone to be in a position for access and opportunity? These things, these questions, we have to be prepared for. We have to anticipate the needs of the organization. We have to look at the demographics of our organization from an equity lens. And for those that are coming up on tenure that may be transitioning, we have to know what roles are going to anticipate what roles are going to be open and when as we tee up the succession planning process. And there's multi levels and many steps of this. But communication is the key, starting out small, knowing that this is an investment of not just the process, but also the people, your internal staff, all become so critical.
That's right. Eat the elephant one bite at a time.
One
Start
bite at a time.
start small, but make sure you start and communicate, even if there is no update to communicate. It's we're still continuing on this mission, right? So just don't underestimate the power of communications. All right, Tawana, this has been such an amazing, amazing conversation. And I know the viewers got a lot of value out of it, right? And we dumped a lot. So go back and listen to the replay.
Absolutely.
Bring a friend, comment below, all the things, right? Because we want to hear what else we need to be preparing for. But before we wrap up, what is that one action that people can take now when creating their succession plan?
So I normally am succinct when you ask me this question, but there were so many jewels that was dropped here, and I really do hope that it's beneficial to everyone that listen. But I would tell you, gain alignment from leadership that you will have a formal succession plan. Formal, because they're informal, but we need more formal. Get clear on the metrics, including a diversity check. Ensure that the process is free of biases and hold everyone accountable. Train the entire organization on this process so they know what to expect. Review the market dynamics quarterly, not to mention understanding the COVID impact, which has created a volatile environment, right? So it justifies you reviewing your process and the people on a quarterly basis. And I can honestly tell you that that is new for those of us who've been at this game for 25 years, okay? We would do it mid or annually, but I'm suggesting that you really look at this process quarterly. And if you need help, always remember that OAIB is here to support you move through this process, create a process, revamp your current process. But this is something that is foundationally that is needed in all organizations at some level. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Tawana. And I will just say my one action for you all, everything that Tawana said, but if you need to know your next step, answer the question, what are the key roles within my organization that if this person walked away, I need to be prepared for? Start there. Define those key roles. What is it that they do? And answer, do I have someone that can take on that role if that person left today?
Good question.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, everyone, that brings us to an end. It is the Tuesday where we are providing SHRM PDCs. So thank you all for participating today. Again, tell a friend, bring a friend, watch the replay and comment below. And know that on today, OAIB is approved by SHRM to offer PDCs for the SHRM CP and the SHRM SCP. This session has been pre-approved for one PDC. You can claim that recertification credit with program code 23-HNHGR. Again, that's 23-HNHGR. It's important that you keep track of the sessions that you view, as OAIB will not be able to provide you with a record of the sessions you attended. All right. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll see you again on the first Tuesday of the next month. Bye.
Bye.